Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Prop Pod, your Star Wars cosplay-centric side to the Star Wars Stuff Podcast Network. My name is Hunter. Someone's got
Come on.
I'm Star.
I'm Cap.
I'm Jedi Master Obi-Wan Kenobi.
Ooh.
That's really good.
Misa Blue Harvest. I'm just kidding. No. Hey, what's up, guys? It's Colin. There we go.
All right, so today we're going to start off by trying a new segment at the beginning here. We're going to just do a weekly recap of anything any of us have been working on project-wise, whether that be costumes or props or whatever. All of us are always working on projects, so I'm sure there will be things to talk about. Colin, do you want to start?
Yeah. So right now I am almost at the end of my first commission that I am doing. I am building Chewbacca shirt and pants on the side, which, the first time I was kind of nervous, didn't know what I was doing. But now, now that I know what I'm doing, it's going a lot quicker because of the first one took 97 hours. This one, I'm about 32 hours in and I'm almost done with the shirt. And I've already got the pants done, which is insane. So that shows you time and practice and all that great stuff. You can do it too. Well, yeah. So, yeah, that's what I've been working on.
Josh, what
I'm
about
enjoying
you?
a distinct lack of fur in my household by not working on a Wookiee. That's
Did you shave your dog or something?
No, my dog doesn't shed. He's a non-shedding dog. I'm painting Warhammer. I'm not working on costume stuff right now. I'm painting Warhammer and praying to God my car doesn't break down. It's enough.
Just neglecting your droid son.
I'm not neglecting my droid son. I'm giving my droid son room to breathe and getting some other stuff done so that when I
how is he
do,
breathing if his body isn't assembled?
You also just said you had nothing else going on. So what other stuff are you doing?
I said I'm painting Warhammer and praying to God my car doesn't break down. That's enough for now. But once that stuff is done, then I can have my full attention on my droid son.
I look forward to it.
I'd rather not half focus on the droid. I want to give my full stop it, Hannah.
I agree with Hannah.
There you go.
She was my full legal name.
I have not done a lot other than working on a dissertation, but I did start my Master Chief helmet this week. So yes, I'm excited about that. It's going to take a while, but that's fine.
All right, there you go. Star?
I have not worked on anything since Dragon Con. I have been taking a break for the start of the semester. Another excuse that's probably not great. But the next thing I need to do is get Crosshair ready to submit for approval.
Yeah.
I don't have a lot to do. It's just a little bit of leather working for the belt, pretty much. So a couple other details, but yeah.
There you go. All right. Hunter?
I have been working on some commissions as well. Sadly, not everything. Sadly, I have a day job that I have to go to, and I can't just work on stuff all day.
Gross.
I have been working on commissions a little bit. I have a Vader helmet that I'm painting, and then I have another run of 10 Clone Trooper helmets that I'm painting up for a client. Those are the two that I've been working on this week, and then I've also been able to dump a bunch of time into my RX droid build, which is super exciting. It's my first foray into animatronic design as well as RC systems, and I'm super, super stoked about that. We were out of town last weekend, but I brought my laptop and got a bunch of modeling done on that. So yeah, I'm super, super stoked to get working on that more. But yeah, that's everything for me. I think that's everybody for as far as what we've been working on this week. So our main topic for this week's episode is props of Star Wars. We had kind of focused on weapons, but I think a lot of what we're going to talk about here also coincides with like hand props and that kind of thing too. So we'll touch on that, but obviously like weapons that you'd select for a Mandalorian to kind of tie in with what we talked about last week, or any other costume and stuff like that. It'll all be sort of applicable. The first thing that we wanted to talk about was the history of Star Wars props. So I think that everyone can envision some really iconic original trilogy designs and stuff. And a really important thing that I don't think everybody realizes, I mean, obviously, like we all kind of have exposure to it because we spend a lot of time working on these types of projects, but a lot of people don't realize that a ton of props in the original trilogy, as well as the prequels and sequels and everything, were actually based off of real world objects. So we'll touch on or keep coming back to this as we talk about weapons and props and stuff, but it's important to keep your props and other costume accessories grounded to the real world. At least in my mind it is, because that like matches the Star Wars aesthetic. They've been doing that since the original trilogy. The prop department for the original trilogy over at Pinewood, they pulled a ton of props or bases for props, I should say, from the Bapti Armory, which was like a costume and prop rental house over there. So that rental house, Bapti, they had a ton of surplus stuff from the World Wars over in Europe. And a ton of the Star Wars props that we all know and love were based off of real world objects. So I guess my question to you guys, do you guys have favorite original trilogy or favorite found props?
Oof. There's so many.
There are a lot. It is Star Wars, and there's a lot of shit in Star Wars.
Yeah. Well, actually, I've got a prop book over here. Hang on.
While Colin's finding his book, I know I spent a lot of time looking at the differences of all the DL-44s, or I guess any Mauser-based blaster, I guess is the proper word for in Star Wars, would be like the Marison or Hans, be it A New Hope, Empire, Solo Star Wars Story, which is one that I did. So I have a lot of respect and like a lot of research put into like how that came about, the differences among them. And it's really interesting to me how kind of the Mauser base became almost what the DL-44 actually is. And then it became a very like character piece on either like Luke's has a different scope than Han's and the different flash hiders. It became a very much like, this is a personalized weapon that anyone who has it has their own version of it, which I thought was really, really interesting.
Yeah, the Mauser was one that I definitely wanted to talk about today. For people viewing, you can see it, but people listening, you won't be able to. I am holding up the Han Solo DL-44 that I wear with my costume. This is weathered and painted up like the A New Hope version, the A New Hope Hero version, I should specify, although it's based off of an airsoft gun. But Josh alluded to the fact that the original DL-44 was based off of a German C96 Mauser pistol, and then it had a flash hider put on it and a Hensoldt Wetzler scope, and then some other accessories and stuff.
Yeah, the bull barrel, the scope mount. Also note that in New Hope there was a second version, actually 3 or 4, but there was also the Greedo Killer version that was used for the killing Greedo because Han shot first scene, where it used pretty sure it was a compact super scope and then a different flash hider, no bull barrel. The flash hider was extended out, had a different grill on the front, I think.
Yeah, that one was square.
And it's very, very odd. It was like filmed in a different location, so they needed to remake Han's blaster for this. So
they filmed the Han and Greedo scene back in the U.S. during the pickup shots. So that was filmed in California. The rest of the cantina scenes and like the majority of the rest of Star Wars was filmed back in Europe at Pinewood. And they, for whatever reason, like couldn't bring the original prop back in time. I'm pretty sure they eventually got it back, but they just didn't have it when they needed to film those scenes. So yeah.
Really interesting pieces of history when it comes to especially the props in the OT and the early OT films because of how the production had to be handled because of either the budget or the time or anything else.
Yeah.
The other thing is in Solo, which I don't think it was canon before Solo, but in Solo we found out that his blaster was part of a rifle, and then it was like dismembered and into a pistol, which we didn't know until Solo, right?
No, that was an additional thing they did for Solo.
It was okay.
The Mauser broom handle does have it's like stock options, like the actual firearm base that it used is similar in that vein. But yeah, no, Solo was the first to do that, and Solo was also the first film to use as Hunter mentioned earlier. This is going into such a side rant. There's 2 different airsoft guns that have been used in like the Disney era of Star Wars for their DL-44s. I can't remember the specific names right now, but there's one they used for The Force Awakens, and then they did a different version.
Evike AW Custom, and that's what this one is.
Yep, and then there's the AWC that was used for Solo. So it's the
I
base
believe
of the
they're
blaster.
the same, but just sold by different places.
They are not. They have a different magazine and a different CO2 cartridge entry point. They also have differences in the scope where the AWC has a weird nub on it for some reason.
Nice.
Anywho, there's a lot. But so in Solo, they changed the entire safety side. They changed the grill. They changed the dials. They changed the bull barrel. They changed the scope mounting point. They like slid it forward. They changed the small tightening nubs, and they added. Yeah, that was everything. Oh, and then they added like a little groove to the scope, like dial on top of it. But anyway, there's a lot of different things. But they used that same one when they made the Marison blasters for Andor. So they've kind of transitioned into using DL-44 airsoft replicas as bases for the screen-used blasters in the modern age, which is really interesting that the replica of the mock-up is now being used to modify and use for filming.
Yeah.
It's a circle of life or something like that.
So for me, it would probably have to be the Anakin Skywalker hilt that was used in New Hope.
On my list to talk about as well.
Okay.
You can.
Do you want me to wait?
No,
okay.
Go for it.
Okay. So
you're great at them.
Okay. So I think the beauty about Star Wars props, and which most of us know, and you're probably figuring out if you didn't know, is like it's definitely real world items, but it's just added with a mix of things, and that's what the Anakin Skywalker lightsaber was, because it was part of a flash camera like way back in the day, and then they added like the small grips of the small black grips on the side. Those were of calculator.
The black strips have not been identified yet.
Okay, I thought they were the calculator bubble strips.
That's what's in the little clip.
So I have right down a trough was a Vader saber. So the Skywalker saber was built off of a Graflex flash handle.
Dude, I got one. Hang on.
The Vader one that you see here is based off of an MPP micro flash handle. But the bubbles, and I think they're the same between the Vader and Luke's saber in A New Hope. But these bubbles that you see right here, those are from a Texas Instruments calculator. So across the original trilogy, you see all kinds of funky stuff. Like Boba Fett's got a bunch of Casio calculator parts on him. Yeah, there you go. Colin's showing what looks like
it's an Empire.
So
is an amalgamation.
Yeah, amalgamation, but like
because
because Empire they added like the studs on the bottom, and different calculator strip.
Yeah. So it changes movie to movie like everything else in the original trilogy. They weren't really consistent about anything.
It says copyright New York on the underside of the hilt in Empire Strikes Back. So New York is canon in Star Wars.
Yes. It's my favorite.
Say that, don't. Yeah. Oh man. Yeah. Because if you look in the prequel era, it doesn't have this clip on the bottom here.
So the prequel era one the Skinny Flex is a totally different saber. That one's not actually built off of a Graflex. That was just like a similar shaped body that they specifically made to be Anakin's saber. So technically it's the same one in universe, but there's like different bits and bobs on there that are changed, and form factor slightly changes throughout everything.
No. I just love props, man. They're so cool. Like, I just
Me
love
too.
the stories behind them. But it's funny now because of, if you look at the props now, like for example, like an Andor or the Mandalorian, you could probably find them on Amazon, and I think that's the funniest thing.
Some of them you can, usually not the main stuff, but like random background things like cups and things like that.
Well, so a couple of years ago, there was a hurricane that was coming in Florida, and my wife was like, I'm going to buy some lamps just in case the power goes out. And then we like started watching Andor shortly after the hurricane. And I think it was the first episode of where Cassian just kind of pulls out this lamp and like holds it. And I'm like, we got that. And I pulled it out and I was like, no way. So it's just like, you like just have to really pay attention to props, because I know there was also the chairs at the end of season 3 and The Mandalorian, and I think you could get them from like IKEA or Walmart or something like that. And like those,
I know,
like
Jonathan Adler, the furniture company, has some chairs that show up in Andor as well, in Mon Mothma's office.
It's so cool. Yeah, props are cool. Star Cap, how about you?
So my favorite props, surprise, surprise, are going to be all things DC's. But going back like a little earlier in the conversation to sort of the conversation about the original trilogy and using a lot of World War II stuff, something I love about all of the props from the original trilogies is how much that grounds the story in a specific historical time that really makes you think about when, you know, the whole world is at war fighting the big bad guys, the Nazis, and like pulling all of that history kind of in by using those different pieces of like actual weapons like the Mauser and all of that. It really makes those movies feel like they're connected to this kind of epic struggle because they're kind of connected to this historical one. And it stands the test of time really well. And visually that's portrayed through the props. So I just love that about all the original trilogy things, but DC's. So we can talk about DC's now. We can talk about DC's later, as long as we talk about DC's.
Yeah, I think it is important to talk about the prequel props too, and how they kind of got away from building them with physical props or with physical kit bashed items. But before, I think to kind of transition into that, I want to talk about some like blaster and lightsaber items. So in the original trilogy, you have the skiff guards that have these really cool force pike axe things. Those were built out of like non-weapon props, and there's a lot of other things. So like if you think about Obi-Wan's saber in A New Hope, the bottom of it that has kind of those like raised rectangular bumps around it, that's actually like just a twist knob for like a sink or something that was produced, and they assembled that. So like Obi-Wan's his lightsaber, it's got like a sink knob, it has the body of a British rifle grenade, it has a Graflex clamp on there, and then some other parts as well. But you even get into weirder stuff when you get into the skiff guard axes. The top part that like connects to the blade of the main skiff guard axe in Jedi is actually a Gillette blow dryer.
Oh my god! See, I had no idea. That's really hilarious.
Stuff like that, and then you get into when they were making props for Phantom Menace, and you have the Jedi communicator, and that is this really funky looking Gillette women's razor from the 90s. That's like the main body of it, and then there's other stuff glued on top. So point to take away from that is what you are using to build props for your costume and stuff doesn't always need to be a Nerf gun or something that was meant to look weapon-like. You can take something that out of context may look more technical and sci-fi-ish than it actually is, like a women's razor or other random stuff like that. So
there's definitely a reflection of that too in like how films were made versus how they are now, where they couldn't model and print something within the day and have it on hand to be able to have a prop that looked sci-fi or looked like like they had to make it and see what fit with just random stuff that they had to like search and find and like make it work. And I think there's a certain level of like almost like romanticism to that, if that's the right word, or like a beauty of that art and that craft.
Yes, that. So, Josh, I'll let you finish your thought, but there's a couple sources I want to mention for people if
go for it.
So, the video or the thing that opened my eyes to this whole world of Star Wars, which I guess there's two sources that I kind of discovered around the same time. The RPF, the Replica Prop Forum, which we've mentioned before on here in our research episode. There is just a wealth of knowledge of people diving into that kind of history for Star Wars, and a really, really great breakdown of all of that. That was kind of my first eye opener to it all. 11 years ago, tested.com, Adam Savage's Tested, they posted a video where Norm and Adam went through and broke down a New Hope DL44 build. And it was just like mind-blowing to me at the time, because it made me realize stuff that I'd never thought about in Star Wars in regards to the behind-the-scenes stuff. So if you want to check out either the RPF or that Tested video on YouTube, and then one more source that's really fun to just look through, parts of sw.com. This website, if you go to the website, you will realize how old it is. But parts of StarWars.com was put together by some fans who were like super, super deep into this kind of stuff. And it has a whole bunch of props from the original trilogy and the prequels. And it breaks down like where their components are from and things like that. And it's just like, it's cool for me to look through that. I don't know. I get jazzed up about it.
Old websites are so good.
What?
And
old websites.
Oh yeah, this thing looks clunky as hell, but there's a ton of good info on there.
Like 4 lines of HTML. Sign me up.
Mm-hmm.
And then, Len, a couple of years ago, Kristen Baver helped make this book, and like it's so detailed. It's really cool. So if you guys haven't checked out Star Wars 100 Objects, go check it out.
That's a great book. Brandon Allinger's Star Wars Costumed is really good.
Yeah.
If you can get your hands on it, the Dressing a Galaxy book, which is the prequel version of that, is one of my favorite reference books. And then
you just got one, right? Like a couple of months back?
Probably, I don't know. It's got to be getting close to a year.
Yeah.
I think. But yeah, it's a hard book to find. And I was really stoked to have it just because it has some really good reference pictures in there. And even like visual dictionaries and stuff have it too, because you can learn a lot from looking at the aesthetic of props and their like implied functionality, even if you don't know what the original parts are. And I think that transitions well into talking about non-physical builds for props and stuff. Cap was talking about the DCs, the clone blasters, and how all those go together, and you'll still see some really cool grounded stuff in those. Actually, another show and tell object here. This is a rubber casting of a DLT-19, which was a MG-32 machine gun that the Germans used in World War II. But something crucial to look at on this, I'm trying to see how the lighting is going to be best, but if you look at the handle,
an Indiana Jones reference.
This handle and this whole area should look really similar in the context of clone trooper blasters. And they, even though props may not be actually put together using physical stuff, they are still informed by the design and functionality of real world objects. Cap, I know you wanted to talk about DCs, and I feel like I'm talking about props. So someone else talk. You're also
you're muted.
Cap.
You're muted.
Nice. I honestly, I would probably just repeat over and over that I love them. I don't have a lot of history or sort of background knowledge to like add here, so I'll probably have to turn it back over to Hunter because most of my love for these is just I visually really love them, and I like to build them too. I should have brought that one up that I finished last year, but I made this one for a custom Mando, for Stars Custom Mando, and it's got I kind of like weathered it down to silver to kind of give it this really sort of old look. I added some like orange paint into it to give this sort of rust feel, and it's a really cool prop, but again, I left it in the basement. So anyway, but as far as like the history of these or how, you know, folks kind of designed these originally, I'll have to hand it right back over to Hunter.
I don't have a ton of info on the design for the DCs beyond that either. But that was kind of my main point is like you look at the way that the more iconic Star Wars props are designed, and they are informed by real world objects.
Yep.
I apologize for not knowing. I forget what the actual gun model was.
Hunter.
But Din's blaster is an amalgamation of some different real world gun parts, and some of them I believe were kind of like stretched and warped and stuff too. Someone has to fact check me on that, but I know it's based off of some real stuff.
Yeah, when it comes to talking about the Mandalorian, that's a very how they kind of created, especially season 1 of that show, which I love so much. It's so good. But the way they approached making the props and the costumes, and that was very similar to kind of trying to replicate what they did for the OT, which was going back to using real world examples of objects and modifying them so they kind of fit the Star Wars aesthetic, which the Star Wars aesthetic, especially in the OT, I think is a lot of function over form, where you have a shape and then they're like, okay, well, what's the obvious things that this object would need to do? Like Han Solo. Oh, well, it's a pistol. He needs a scope for it. Let's add this giant rifle scope with an over-the-top attachment point and a giant flash hider. Like, if you look at the models, especially when you talk about how the ships were made, they added a bunch of pipes and greebling, and all of those were added in an idea of, we want someone to be able to look at this, even a kid, and immediately be able to understand what on earth it does without having a nice, clean, like, cover over everything so it has a beautiful silhouette. Like, they allowed stuff to look dirty and kind of odd, which is a lot of things that are really easy to take into, especially when you're building your own props and costumes, especially custom-wise, is letting them be easily informed by just being able to look at something and understand what its purpose is. And that's definitely something that was true for the Mandalorian and how they went back to using real pistols. There was a bounty hunter droid that had these Russian pouches on him, which I've had these for like over a decade now. I got them from my father after he made a questionable purchase, and it was really cool to see them on a droid because it was like, oh, weird. It was just cool. And it's interesting to see how they take things that, you know, you can easily connect those dots and understand what they are. That was a rant that I'm pretty sure had no point to it. But.
Dude, I feel like I've been doing that for the last half hour, but here we are.
Guys, we're called Star Wars Stuff. Star Wars Stuff.
This is Star Wars stuff.
Is just, yes. So
I thought we were prop pod.
It's
subgenre. Subgenre.
I have sent you so many memos, so many emails explaining this. It's not my fault that you don't pay attention.
It's not my fault that I can't read.
That does sound like your fault, but all right. So we've talked enough about actual props and stuff and what they like what we think they should look like, or like what Star Wars has kind of told us they should look like through its design style. But we do want to talk about the actual process of picking one out and building one, and like the materials and what kind of techniques and stuff that we like. So we can jump into that. Kat, do you want to start with talking about like how you choose what kind of props and stuff you want for a costume?
Yeah, sure. So I think, there's two considerations that you need to think about. One, building your costume for approval with one of the clubs, because if that's the case, then you've probably got a certain set of weapons that are going to go with that character. So for me, this is why I like DCs. I just use a lot of these because all my builds are clones. And so a lot of those, you already know what those are. They're going to be on your CRL website. So you've got your weapons kind of listed there. But then if you're building like a custom, like Mandalorian, or even just a custom character, you're just building one that it's not even for the clubs, then you want to start thinking about like, how am I going to match this weapon to the costume that I'm building? And so for the case of Mandos, which is what we talked about in the last episode, you might want to start thinking about like, okay, so my Mando build it's got a lot of weathering to it. My Mando clearly has kind of been through a lot of stuff. There's a bunch of dings all over the armor. It looks dirty, it looks weathered. Maybe my weapon ought to kind of match that. So you might be thinking like, okay, is my Mando, is it one of the sort of, you're envisioning them being in a desert scape? What kind of weapons might they want to use if that's where their primary environment is? Do they need a knife? What kind of gun do they have? And you can, especially with a Mando, you can have tons of different weapons. So you just want to kind of think through how to match the stuff to the build itself, and vice versa. Maybe you started with, I have this cool weapon, I want to build a Mando to match it, or like I built a droid and I want to match my droid, or whatever, as is the case with Hunter. But I think those are kind of the two main considerations when you're picking weapons for your costumes.
Yeah.
Also, shout out a previous episode of the prop pod where we talked about like material choices for costumes, and we did touch a little bit on props for that. So similar conversation vein. If you haven't seen that previous episode, please go check it out.
Yep, it's on all platforms: Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, all of it. Yeah.
There's metal props and stuff, but they kind of suck to carry around at conventions. Like your arm gets tired.
Yeah. Or if you put it in a holster, like it weighs it down so much.
Yes.
My Han DL44, like I don't wear it if I'm walking around because I hate carrying things, and I hate how much weight it adds to my right thigh.
So it's the same thing with mine because of like mine is like a prop, like it's got that weight to it where it like and it's just so funny because of when I first got my Stormtrooper, my E11 was the same thing. So every time I put it in the holster, my whole belt would just go whoop, and I was like, oh no, I cannot put this in the holster. So right. So sometimes going the lighter route works, like not only for like prop placement, but also it's also a lot lighter, like carrying it, and maybe you already got enough weight on you, so just having a lighter weapon takes off the weight a little bit. So
well, and you could probably complain about this with Crosshair's gun, right? Because you've got that giant fire puncher.
Yes,
I complain about it a lot.
Yep,
you've got that giant backpack too, and then you can put the
the blaster is fully printed, right, Star?
Yeah, it's printed, so it's heavy for me. I wish it was lighter. I'm not sure exactly how to make it lighter. After I think the convention, I think I was in kit for 8 hours at one convention carrying that fire puncher around, and by the end of the day.
Yeah. I remember the first time I trooped in my Boba. So Boba's EE3, the base grip to it is a flare gun, but the way it connects to the stock, it's got these really thin connection areas. So the cast that I got, it's a rubber cast, which sometimes rubber is light, sometimes it's heavy, depending on the kind of rubber. But because it's so thin there, it's a steel reinforced cast. And that event that was at Indie PopCon in 2016 or something. But I wore boba like all day, and lots of things were just a total mess. But among those was the fact that the next day, because I was walking around with my blaster up like this the whole day, this arm, like my elbow joint, was just destroyed.
Yeah.
So you really got to pay attention to that. You don't think about it when you're like, oh, that looks cool. And then your body pays for it.
Yep.
Yeah,
That's
I have the same
exactly
thing with
what I
my
did.
fixer. DC
Yeah.
17, because the magazine comes out the side towards your body, so you have to like twist it and hold it up. Like you can't just like hang it by your side. My right bicep is always dying within like 30 minutes.
Yeah.
That is a frustrating thing about Star Wars props, which like makes sense if it's a right hand held weapon, because the
Well,
like,
also it's
if there were
made for
shells, they
video
would
games,
eject.
so you can see the magazine like deteriorate in ammunition. Like it's a visual cue for a game, not meant to be held in reality.
Yes.
Well, maybe that goes back to like if you are building a custom, like Mando, or even just like a random custom character, you don't have to pick the biggest, heaviest, most accurate weapon. You can choose something small. You can make a holster for it.
You don't have to
neglected to do. No, you don't. Yep. So be smart about what you want to carry around for hours.
But if you do want a weapon, various materials. We talked about metal. Star talked about 3D printing, which can sometimes be light, but if you got to connect a bunch of pieces and use a bunch of filler and stuff, it'll get real heavy real fast.
Yeah.
And
Well,
that's
and
kind of the same thing with resin too.
Yep, and your blaster, the fire puncher, it's got like dowel sticks, to reinforce it. So it's got wood, inside of it, and so it's not just even the 3D print. So it really does; those do get heavy,
beefy.
Yeah.
Ounces make kilos, bro.
Yep.
And then finally, I mentioned rubber a little bit too. So all the stunt props that they use in actual movies are urethane rubber and stuff, so that if an actor falls on them or they drop them or something, they're just gonna bounce or whatever. So like this E11 is cast in a urethane rubber, and like the slide over here, you can just like totally bend that. And you can see how I can like twist the scope and all that.
Yeah.
It's nice because it's lighter, probably not your lightest material, but you don't have to worry about dropping it because it'll bounce.
Right. Well, so I remember watching the documentary for the Phantom Menace of the lightsaber props, of what they had to go through. And they made so many different types of hilts, like going through the prequel like trilogy, because the actors would drop lightsabers all the time. But I love the actual sticks that they use for because they didn't have what they had like for Force Awakens, where like they had the actors could see the actual blades, so they would have to put in the actual like lightsaber art later. But it was like these sticks, and Ewan McGregor would go through so many of them because he would just be going so hard of just whacking the lightsabers, and they would just get bent and stuff. And it was just so interesting to see like of just how many like things they went through like prop wise. And I think Ewan said there was also a prop lightsaber guy on set where that was just his job, of where he would be standing on the side of the set when the lightsaber would break. That guy would walk and be like, all right, here we go. And like 30 lightsabers would just be in that cart, just waiting for the actors to go through so many. So it's so cool. Yeah.
So we've kind of talked about
be like that.
I think most of what we wanted to talk about. Maybe one thing we should talk about that I don't think we have yet is converting like a Nerf gun, or Josh and I both talked about converting airsoft guns into more Star Warsy looking props. But Nerf guns are a thing too. In my mind, like you got to heavily modify one and make sure you fill in all of the bolt holes sand away all the branding and stuff, and then dress it up more on top of that. But sometimes it can be a good base, even if it's just to get. Sometimes that like pistol grip shape is hard to get right, and sometimes you just use a toy gun or something for that. That'll be a good start. But yeah, does anyone have anything they want to add about like converting potential toy blasters and stuff?
Yeah, that's where I'm at with my Cal build, and I think ultimately I will probably print a Westar for him, but I was kind of in a rush to try to like wear him to a con, so I got a Ruby's Westar, and it looks fairly accurate. You got to sand it down and paint really carefully, but you can use like some of the Ruby's guns, and then as long as you're careful with the painting, they turn out looking pretty good, and those are really light, and I do not feel so bad about dropping and breaking that. So yeah, that works as well.
Somewhat separate from Star Wars stuff, the Halo Nerf blasters, really easy to mod and paint up and like sand off the legal text, fill the whatever you want to do, but those paint up really, really nice, and those are pretty fun because they're not, because at the end of the day, Nerf guns are made to be blasters and not look like children are running around the lawn with actual firearms. So you need to be able to modify a lot of the geometry so that after paint, it would look like a functional thing that matches the Star Wars universe. There's a level of ease that comes from that.
I think Josh's wording there brings up something very important too. You should make your props for your costumes so they look like fake weapons and not like real weapons, because that can scare people and it can get the cops called on you, and that's a bad thing. There's many people in Legion. There's someone I was talking to last week who went out for a photo shoot in their own neighborhood and had the police called on them, and the cops showed up and were not very nice to him and wrecked parts of his armor and his blaster, all because the neighbor thought that it was a real firearm and there was someone walking around the neighborhood in body armor, which
yikes,
I guess was the case from a certain point of view, but not in reality. And there was a big misunderstanding, and you got to be careful when you do this kind of thing too. I don't think we've mentioned that at all, but it's important to differentiate your costume pieces from real world things that could cause harm to others.
Yes.
Yeah, and be careful. When you're going to a con, check the website beforehand. Make sure you know the weapons policy, and just follow it, because it does scare. And we should be careful of that.
Right. Yeah. I mean, because of not everyone is going to be on the same level as you. So not everyone is going to be like, that's a stormtrooper. Some people will be like, that person has a real gun or something like that. So just be careful. That is definitely important. Oh.
Be very careful when you give your prop to a weapons check, dude, though. They might just absolutely crank the static trigger and break it off.
Yeah.
But
yeah,
no, there's levels of safety to everything. And at the end of the day, this was like a very interesting conversation for us to dive into, like the design philosophy of how they made props in the original films, how the keeping in mind when you're making a custom or making a prop in general, keeping in mind like some rules of thumb of make it have function and form and all those things, so you can look at it and understand what it does. But at the end of the day, like, all of this is either you're replicating something from a show or you're making something your own and trying to find the design language of Star Wars. So understanding how that came about and where those processes kind of come into play is really handy, so that you can mesh into that universe.
Yeah. Well, I think that was kind of a short episode for us, but I think we've gotten through everything that we wanted to talk about.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, we have a lot of things lined up for the future for this segment, because I think this segment, there's so many endless possibilities to talk about. Like, there's a lot to talk about.
Yeah, one of these days we're going to talk about clones, and it'll be a 4-hour long episode.
Yeah, we need like 3 episodes.
Yeah,
and
Commando episode.
We should actually do an episode on animated and an episode on realistic.
Yeah.
Yes,
Never,
absolutely.
never, ever for like the entire audience for future reference. Never play Hughes and Q's with Hunter Smoke. Never play that game with Hunter.
No, but it's fun.
Maybe that'll be the bonus episode. We play Hughes and Q's on air,
Oh my god.
and everyone can hear me
Nah.
swear about Boba
That
Fett.
better be Patreon only, I swear.
Yeah, no,
I will swear.
I feel like for the clone episodes, you guys are just going to be badgering me because I'm the only one in our group that doesn't have a clone.
Yeah, prepare yourself, General Skywalker.
Oh, I will get there. Don't you worry. Don't you worry. But yeah, you can find us over at on Instagram at StuffPod, X at StuffPod. Sorry, Instagram at Star Wars Stuff Pod, X StuffPod, Thread Star Wars Stuff Podcast. Go to patreon.com at Star Wars Stuff Podcast 2187. We are rewatching the Clone Wars. We will get to Revenge of the Sith one day. Don't worry. I know we've been saying that for a while, but like, you know, I just love talking Star Wars, and I know like it takes a while, but it's so much fun like getting to the destination. We are on TikTok, Star Wars Stuff Podcast, Facebook, Star Wars Stuff Pod. Basically, go on social media and look up Star Wars Stuff Podcast. Okay, all right. Is there any words of wisdom that anyone wants to leave with?
Mute Josh.
Wow. Okay. You actually muted him. Nice. All right. Cool. With that being said, bye, Hannah.
Sorry.
May the force be with you. May the
Always.
force be with you always.